love doesn't come without loss, but that's the joy of loving, isn't it? We need to see it as part of the process. Our children are with us for a set period of time, and we know that. And I would rather dive in head first and be fully attached, but then maybe get a little bit hurt, because that's who I am. So what we really want is to teach children right and wrong and why, so that they can become critical thinkers, so that they become actually nice people and good citizens of the world.
Hello! And welcome to episode number something of the Tiny Chair Pod with Tamsin Grimmer. It's going to be a good one.
It is going to be a good one. And you know what, Matt? I really need a good episode this morning.
Yeah, we've had a bit of a morning. We're not necessarily... I'm glad we're going to get the chance to talk about love with Tamsin, because we've had a bit of a hateful morning, haven't we?
I'm not feeling the love. I'll be honest.
We lost a cable for the podcast, so I had to cycle to go and get a new one of those. Your train was terribly delayed by snowstorms.
About half an hour. We're having a snowstorm here.
A poop incident with your little one?
Yeah, I got pooped all over. My children have been a little bit unwell this week, and the symptoms of that displayed themselves all over the outfit that I was previously wearing. So we
are ready for a little bit of a nice, cozy chat about love. So I think with no further ado, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
And welcome Tamsin Grimmer to the podcast.
Yeah. Matthew, would you introduce our guest, please?
I would absolutely love to. So, Tamsin is an early childhood and early education specialist with she's got a lot of roles.
She's got a treasure trove of roles.
It's very exciting, an absolute treasure trove of roles. So, as well as being a trainer and a consultant, Tamsin is the principal lecturer in early years at the very prestigious Norland College. I think we might dig into that later because I'm very excited about that. She's also the early years education director at Linden Learning and an early education associate at the early education. She's also a speaker, a writer. You can, of course, find her on the family blog, like any great writer.
All good early years writers.
And an advocate of Loving Pedagogy, which is something that we're going to be getting into today. She even found the time to chat to us at Nursery World a few years ago.
I had a lovely chat with her.
That was very nice. Yeah. But welcome to the podcast, Tamsin.
Thank you ever so much. And you forgot to say I'm a mum. That's like my most important...
Most important role. I've recently learnt that. That's the main gig, is being a parent. Yeah, that's what matters.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, should we get straight into it?
Shall we? Now, Tamsin, if you have seen previous episodes of the Tiny Chair podcast, you might be familiar that at the top of the episode, we usually ask guests if they have an ick. Do you know what an ick is?
Like a bugbear or something.
Exactly. Do you have an early years ick?
Well, I do. As everyone does, I have several, but I'll just go with one. When you hear a practitioner in a very well-meaning way say to a child, "Oh, you're okay," and they kind of like, the child is clearly not okay, and they might kind of say, "Oh, we're all happy here at name of nursery or name of school, happy school," and I think, no, we're not. I've been in your staff room. I know what it's like. So I just think that's unrealistic, and we should actually be much more honest with children and acknowledge what they're feeling, because it's okay to feel unhappy, or it's okay to miss your mum, isn't it? I miss mine, and I'm nearly 51, so it's okay to feel however you feel. And I think just sort of saying, "Oh, you're okay," really winds me up.
I get that though, because back when I was working in settings, that was really common. Like if a child topples over and they do that thing where they look up at you and you look at them and you're thinking, "Oh, are they going to cry?" And they're like, "Am I going to cry?" And then they go for it. And it was so common to be like, "Oh, you're all right." It's so dismissive. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think is changing, and I try and be better at it with my two, because children.
What's your solution to it, Tamsin? What do you think in that situation? How would you approach that differently?
Just to literally say, "Oh, that looked sore, are you okay? Do you need a hug?" rather than just trying to smooth it all over and kind of negate the feeling or dismiss the feeling, because I think if acknowledging that feeling actually allows the child to think it's okay to, it's okay to cry if you've hurt your knee, because it is, isn't it? So I think it comes to that kind of whole idea that there are emotions that underlie what we do and say, etc., and that actually there aren't good and bad ones. It's just, there are just emotions, and it's all part of being human, isn't it? So let's be realistic with the children and just accept and say, oh, that looked a bit sore, are you all right? And then, yes, we can teach them to get up, brush themselves down and carry on. So it's not letting them dwell in that for too long. It might be, this is what I do when I'm feeling, hurt, or, and then what can we do differently next time? Because if it's because you'd said to them 2 minutes ago, don't run on the decking, it's slippery, and then they run on the decking, at that moment saying to them, well, I did tell you that would happen, not going to help. It's a case of kind of saying, oh, that looks really sore, I wonder what we can do differently next time.
I love that. Child-centered ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Like, ask them to some degree, but I think you are right. It's also not, we don't want to sort of like, because children do often in that moment look to you and go, I'm actually not sure how I feel about this. Can you let me know whether I should be sad about
help
this
me
or
out
not?
here. Like,
we don't want to overreact and say, oh my goodness, have you broken your leg? Because clearly that's not going to help. So we've got to sort of moderate how we're responding, but at the same time allow them to feel whatever it is they're feeling.
Wonderful.
it
Such a
comes
good
back
moment.
to the Tiny Chair Pod theme of having realistic expectations for children in terms of we wouldn't expect an adult, if you fell down the stairs, I wouldn't be like, no, you're all right, Matt, get up,
I'm just thinking about that, like when Mikkel complains about his knees being sore because we forced him to in his corner for the 15th time, and I don't go, you're okay.
To
Mikkel.
run the podcast, not because he's
It's not some sort of dunce corner situation. It's a very small studio we have here, even though it looks very grand.
We can have a little chat about that later.
Yeah, I clearly might be doing something wrong. Let's move on to our quickfire round, shall we, Julia?
shall we?
I'd love to start. This is a completely non-early years question to get the audience to get to know you a bit more, Tamsin. So aside from early years or anything related to early years, what is one thing that you could give an impromptu speech about with little to no preparation? What's like a personal topic of yours that you know loads about?
Specific musicals.
Oh, nice.
okay.
Oh, and the whole neurodiversity side of things, because that's where my family, they all have autism and ADHD, and you become an expert in your children. So, my children I could talk for hours about, but anyway.
Yeah. That's a little bit too close to early years for me. I think we'll go with the musicals.
In fairness, Matt, they're now 15, 16 and a half and 18, so we're not.
That's
close to
true.
early
I
years.
didn't qualify. You weren't allowed to talk about later years, so that's a good loophole you found there. I respect it.
Nice. Shall I go?
Yeah, please.
Who or what has recently inspired you?
Oh, recently inspired me. That's a really good question.
Thank you very much.
I'm afraid it kind of is early years related, because I am a bit of a geek and I do tend to.
Oh, you're allowed to go early years from here on out. It was just that first one. You're good.
Okay, thanks for that. I've been kind of finding out a lot about what are they called, reflexes and things like that. And there's a lovely lady who I actually have known for years, but she's called Gaynor Rawls, and she recently did something actually for early years TV around reflexes and
Future podcast guest, maybe.
Could be a future podcast guest. Love it.
and she's really interesting, and it's all about how children have these reflexes that you have at birth, primitive reflexes, and how what if they're not kind of integrated into your usual way of being, it can leave you with a few sort of sensory differences and things like that. And the really simple things we can do about it, and it's things like why crawling is so important in early childhood, because it helps to integrate those reflexes. And there are lots of different reflexes, and they've all got different names and everything. And I knew a little bit about this, and I've actually, funnily enough, knew her from many years ago. And so I did learn a bit about it then, but it's so interesting to find out more. So I love learning and finding out more stuff.
I'm really excited. I love that. I think it's the Moro reflex. You know, when babies go like this. Sorry for our audio listeners, but yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously, yeah. When you have a little baby and
I've got a lot of that going on right now with
Oh.
my little one. Like, it's that when both the stretching is amazing because it's like a cartoon stretch. It's so like, but also that thing when you put them down and they go.
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
Oh yeah, I'm interested in that. I want to look into that.
Yeah, very nice. So A bit more on the random side. Tamsin, if you opened your own early years setting, what would you call it?
Ooh, I think I would call it, I think it would be a home-based childcare setting. And I would call it loving, I don't know, what would I call it? Loving home, loving learning. I don't know, something like
Loving
that.
learning is lovely.
Loving home, loving learning.
I was
like that.
I was thinking like Tamsin's Tiddlers, something like that. Tamsin's Toddlers,
Oh, yeah.
maybe.
It's a little bit more 90s, that, isn't it?
It
That
is a
kind of-
bit.
Love it.
Oh, is it me?
It's you.
I get so excited. Do you have a motto or a bit of advice that you live by? So something that you sort of reference, or that, you know, when you're having a bad day, maybe you think, oh, just think of that.
Again, that's a really interesting question.
I'm loving this praise.
I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that and reflect on it.
Oh, do you have one, Matt?
Do I have one?
Yeah, do you have a motto? Actually, I know your motto. About the elephant.
The elephant, yeah. I've got a tattoo, again, for the audio listeners, perfect, which has got a bite mark out of its butt. And that is, my mum always used to say, whenever I was stressed, she'd say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
There you go.
So that's whenever I'm feeling stressed, that's my... Do you have one? Yeah.
I don't know, really. Maybe I should get one as well.
Get one, then you can get a tattoo of it.
Yeah.
So
Why
that
not?
you don't forget it.
Yeah.
You've got a visual cue to constantly remind you in case some random interviewer on a podcast asks you for your motto.
Crumbs,
to live by.
yeah. Do you know what? When I wrote that question, I probably should have thought of
about it.
one. Oh,
We
well.
have one last question in our quickfire round, Tamsin. And it's a favourite of mine, which is there something recently you've changed your mind about in early years? Something where maybe you used to think one way, but actually you've come round to a different way of thinking?
It's not very recent. Is that okay?
That is totally okay.
That's fine. You didn't even have to tell us that. We wouldn't have known. That was very honest of
Well,
you.
that's true. But and it's about kind of when I was in practice, I would have very much been giving lots of stickers out and everything else. And I know that's really kind of, we don't seem to do that anymore. And I totally agree with that. At the time, I just thought I was doing the right thing. And I also, so I've really learned differently and would definitely do that very differently now. Does that make sense? But something else would be, again, from kind of years back when I was in practice, I used to have like a, box or something by the door. And if children brought something from home into my setting, even when I was childminding, I didn't want it to get lost or broken. So I would say, oh, let's keep it over here, or let's keep it in your bag. And, and I didn't really recognise or acknowledge the importance of emotional objects. And something I've been learning about myself more recently is that I have an emotional support object, and I'm going to show you what it is because it's probably on my desk somewhere. Here we go. Lip balm.
Oh, yeah.
Very weird, I know,
Love it.
but in every coat pocket, every handbag, wherever, I have a lip balm. And if I go out of the house without my lip balm, I literally feel really uncomfortable. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I haven't got a lip balm with me. Random, because I don't always wear lip balm. And so it's a very strange thing. But I've been talking to loads of people about this over the years, and loads of people have told me they have something. So it might be a packet of tissues, or they have to wear their watch, and if they didn't put their watch on one morning, they would go home for half an hour, get it and come back again and be an hour late for work. Do you know what I mean? Because of something like that.
I know
Love it.
exactly what you mean.
So have you guys got anything?
Do you know
Great
what?
question.
I think mine might be lip balm as well. And I'll tell you for why, right?
Wow.
So I'm not going to drop the brand name because we're not sponsored, but there is a specific brand that has like a kind of dimple in the lid. And it's the perfect size where I can hook it into my fist in my pocket, and I can put my thumb in the little dimple, and you can make the nice clicky noise of taking the lid on and off. Very, very soothing, very comforting. And that's, I have one in pretty much all my coat pockets. In fact, I won't go rifling through it now, but my coat's down there, and I guarantee you'll find one of
Completely
those
agree.
lip balms in there.
And for me, I have this ring, which is one of these fancy rings that tells you how badly you've slept, especially when you have a newborn. And I play with it a lot, just wrinkle it back and forth.
Yep.
And when it's not there, I sort of do it and it's not there and it feels weird.
Yep.
And I actually, when I hold my partner's hand, it really annoys her because I try to do the same with her rings. She sort of slaps my hand away.
Wow.
That's not painting her in a very nice light. But I know what you mean. And I think it's back to, again, theme of the Tiny Chair Pod, expectations on children that we don't... I wouldn't go to you, Julia, if you could put your lip balm in my box of things with all of the other important objects of the other children, and you can have it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. So good point, Tamsin.
But yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Back in the day, we used to get all the children to put their special comfort object up on the shelf, and that was where we put all their daily sheets and everything. And so if they brought in their teddy or they brought in whatever from home, all got put up on the shelf. And yeah, I like that.
Great reflection, Tamsin. Love it.
Lovely. Shall we move into?
Yes, let's get into it. So when we were discussing, we always do because we're the utmost professionals and not just because we love having a chit chat. We always have a quick pre-chat with our guests. And when we were chatting to Tamsin is known for loving pedagogy, and we're going to get into that later 100%. But one of the things you said to us that we thought was really interesting is we asked what keeps coming up in settings and the settings that you work at. And you said the topic of behavior and challenging behavior continues to come up when you're working with other settings. And maybe just wanted to hear you share with the audience what you're seeing in terms of the questions that keep coming up to you when you're working with nurseries.
What I find when I'm going into settings and visiting people and talking to them about behaviour, or during training courses around behaviour, is that people are there to get fixes. They're wanting to sort out the behaviour, know how to respond to the children when they bite, when they kick, when, these things happen. And I think we're actually going about it the wrong way, because I think that's sort of being reactive to the behaviours, and I think we need to actually be proactive and try and prevent as many of these behaviours in the first place, because obviously you've heard the phrase, lots of people say behaviour is communicating needs, behaviour is communicating emotions, etc. But the way that I kind of talk to people about it is to get them to think, well, what is behaviour? What does good behaviour look like in a setting or in a school situation? And what do we think, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Public would say good behaviour is? And there's usually a difference. So if you literally went down to your local high street and asked them that question, the answers would centre around obedience and compliance. Mm-hmm. If you go into schools and settings and ask that question, they talk about being kind, making friends, following instructions, which obviously is a bit about obedience, listening, but that might not just be listening to an adult, it might also be listening to their peers, being respectful, maybe actually having good manners sometimes. But it isn't all about obedience and compliance. It's actually, I would say, about learning behaviours. Because we want our children to be engaged in learning. The more engaged they are, the less time there is for poor behaviour as well. But that's kind of another story. But what I tend to say is actually obedience and compliance isn't and shouldn't be what we're aiming for, because firstly, there are serious safeguarding concerns there. Because if children are taught thou shalt always obey an adult, one day they might meet an adult who does tell them or ask them to do something inappropriate. So what we really want is to teach children right and wrong and why, so that they can become critical thinkers, so that they can actually, have a moral code, so that they become actually nice people and good citizens of the world. Does that make sense?
Oh, I love that. Print it out, put it on a t-shirt. I love that. I would argue also listening to each other, but also listening to their bodies. I think we've come so far as a sector in terms of supporting children to listen to their own bodies, in terms of what feels safe for them, their own hunger cues, whether something is appropriate or not. Because when you're a child, you might not have that vocabulary, but if something feels right or not. And supporting children to recognise and listen to that and act on it, I think is something that's really to be celebrated, actually.
And to be that devil's advocate, I suppose, a little bit. Like, I wonder, when you're talking, I'm thinking, it makes so much sense. Like, I completely agree with everything that you're saying, and I'm sure most of the practitioners listening would, but then they're thinking, oh, but there is Johnny, There is that one child who the behavior becomes so extreme and so challenging. Like, I'd love to get to that point where we were talking about how he self-regulates and so on, but sometimes it's a case of actually just trying to protect the other children from the behavior or not being able to get through. Like, how do you kind of take the theory of what you're talking about into the realism of dealing with like really challenging behavior and how to tackle that?
I would say I'm just going to sort of, I will answer your question, Matt, but I'm going to step sideways a bit, because if you think about how we teach children anything, okay, so let's say, for example, writing their name. If the child is having a go at writing their name, and they come and they show you, oh, you know, I've had a go at writing my name, usually we'd be like, wow, that's amazing, I can see you've written for Tamsin, that's fabulous. At the same time, we're logging, well, that's not right, they haven't done that properly, you know, they haven't got all their letters in the right order, they've missed some, you know, they've done a squiggle where there doesn't need to be one, etc., etc. So we scaffold their learning, we give them loads of opportunities to mark, make, inside, outside, fine and gross motor, you know, activities, we role model writing, we make sure their name is all around the environment. Do you know what I mean? We kind of hit them at it from all angles, so to speak, to try and really embed this idea about writing their name in what they're doing, because they've now got an interest in it, and we want to tap into that interest and really support them with it. But and what we wouldn't do, of course, is, well, that's not how you write your name. Go and sit over there. How old are you? You're 3. Right, go and sit over there for 3 minutes until you can do it properly. Because that's ludicrous. So, you know, when it comes to behaviour, and I'm not saying we all respond in that way, but when it comes to behaviour, adults forget to scaffold. And we forget that we're actually teaching children to behave. So we're back to that, you know, preventative bit again. But of course, we also need lots and lots of tools in our toolboxes so that we can respond in the moment. And, you know, I would say have a wide variety of tools in your toolbox, because, you know, actually you can have things like distraction and ignoring, because they sometimes are useful and work. But if you only ever use distraction and ignoring, actually that's not going to work all the time.
You're not fixing the fundamental problem there. You're just, exactly.
You need to do positive limit setting. You need to have rules and boundaries in place. You need to use, I would suggest, things like emotion coaching. It's where you're supporting the child to, you know, you're empathizing with them, but you're validating their feelings, but then you're problem solving and, you know, setting expectations around their behavior, so that they know what to do next time, because you won't always be there to help them. You know, so have loads of tools in your toolbox so you can select the right one when you need it.
And I think also, like, it comes back to that point. Another one of my favorite phrases is fixing the roof while the sun is shining, right? Which is also making sure that you're thinking about, as you say, emotional coaching and so on. Take those conversations when actually maybe that child who is a bit challenging is having a really great day and working with them in that moment, so that it's not always this reactive, like when things are not going right, as you say. I think that's kind of another key piece of the puzzle, right?
Absolutely.
My mind has been blown there a bit. When you were talking about scaffolding those opportunities, it really resonated with me, because I mean, again, we're moving very much past it, I think, in the sector, but so often a response to behaviour we don't want can be exclusion. And higher up in education, often it's like you're excluded from lessons, or you're sent to isolation, or you're sent. And if the behaviour you're displaying is antisocial, and you're then being prevented from having opportunities to explore ways to be more social, how are you solving that problem? And I'm fascinated by that concept there of like, well, yeah, if a child is experiencing really powerful emotions and isn't regulating themselves and is presenting behaviors that you find very challenging, how is taking them out of that environment going to support that? You've got to scaffold the learning around it. I love that. Oh,
and you know, really, I think that a lot of this is about self-regulation, and you know, self-regulation is it's skills. It involves, you know, well, you could say it also involves executive function skills. Some people say one is, you know, part of the other, or, you know, which one comes above the other, I don't know, but they're very interlinked with each other. And our prefrontal cortex, where those executive function skills sit, isn't fully developed until you're in your mid-20s. So, you know, we're expecting our very youngest children to be using bits of their brain that really aren't fully developed yet. And, you know, because that's where impulse control and things like that fit.
And again, we forgive ourselves for these things as adults. We lose our tempers and we shout and we all behave emotionally and reactively to things. And yet, we're expecting a room full of 3-year-olds to manage themselves better than that. Like, it's mad, isn't it?
Julia, what are we advertising to our wonderful listeners this week?
Nothing.
Sorry?
Nothing. I'm taking up this space to offer a little professional love.
Not this again.
Professional love for our customers, that is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so whether you're a brand new customer or you've been with us for the entire 13-year history of family, whether you've contributed a feature, whether you've offered some feedback on one of our newer features with early testing, we just want to say a huge thank you to you.
That is very fair. Thank you to our wonderful customers. And Julia, what are we doing in return?
Well, if you are a family customer, you can take advantage of some family perks. So if you go into Village, our online community, you can find the perks tab on the left. Click on that and you'll find discounts on services, early years resources, consultancy. It's just a little way that we're saying thank you, giving a little back.
Very nice. That is absolutely perkalicious. Should we get back to the podcast?
I think we should.
All right. I think one of the things that we... is really the hot topic of conversation for the last couple of years, I think, is this thing of like, behaviour's getting worse in settings, and a lot of people want to blame COVID for that, even though that was kind of 5 years ago, and maybe those children are actually somewhere else now, and so on. And I remember when we talked about this before, you had a really interesting point around maybe it's not that children have changed, but actually that the environment has changed and the way in which we're responding to them has changed. And I'd love to hear more about your take on that.
Are children changing? Yes and no. No, because they're still children. And actually, young children are young children are young children. But yes, because the world around them is hugely different. And you cannot look at a child in isolation. They are part of a family, that whatever that family makeup is, they're part of a culture. They might be part of your setting, part of different groups, part of society. So you cannot separate them out from any of that. And all the different influences. I mean, it's very much Bronfenbrenner's model, that, isn't it? But it's all those different influences on the child. And I think that that has changed immensely. Even, if I look at my childhood, when I was very young, obviously, we are looking at over 40 years ago when I was in this young age bracket, my childhood was immensely different to the childhood of the children that I would be looking after today, and it's not just technology. I know lots of people talk about technology. Yes, that is a big part of it, but it's changing understanding about children. It's changing parenting styles. It's changing family roles. It's the way schools teach. That's very different now. It's the working patterns that parents have. There's so many different things, and it's just this big melting pot, really, with all these different things put in. And, there is research that's looked at things like self-regulation skills and have they declined over the years. And there was one study I read that said it was looking at children in the 40s and children in is it called the noughties in like early 2000s?
Yeah, the noughties. I think it is, yeah.
So they were comparing them and they did find that there was a decline. So children from the 40s were able to regulate at a younger age than children in the noughties, so to speak. But when you put that in the context of what was going on in the world, and those children, the 40s, obviously it was still a world war happening at the beginning of that decade, and actually there was so much going on for those children. They had to be incredibly resilient. They were pretty much left to it. It was very much go out to play and I'll see you at tea time sort of parenting, and so the children, lots and lots of outdoors. It was very, very different to the children growing up in the 2000s. So I don't think it's just about the child. I think it's about everything around them, if that makes sense. And I don't think it's a thing we should blame anybody for either, because I don't think that's helpful when we start going down the whole, looking for something to blame, whether technology becomes the scapegoat or COVID. All of these things have impacted. And we just have to accept, but then move on and think, well, okay, this is where we're at. How can we keep the children central and help them now?
What are we going to do about it, basically, is the point. And I think that's,
yes.
I love that point, yeah.
I'm really curious about how regulation or how self-regulation was measured, because if you're looking at children in the 40s, like you say, they had the threat of war, but they also probably had the threat of corporal punishment. Now, they were subject to rationing, so did they have the energy to, so I'm really curious about, was it that they were better at self-regulating, or were they just more repressed because there were bigger fish to fry? I'm really curious about that.
Absolutely. And I mean, you'd have to look at the methodology to know exactly how they measured that. But it's really interesting, isn't it?
Very much so. I think that's quite a good segue
I could talk about this
into
for
loving
hours.
pedagogy.
Yeah, go on.
Because I'm obviously, Tamsin, it's one of the things that you're very well known for is your stance and your wonderful book together with Aaron Bradbury on loving pedagogy. And I'd love to hear a little bit more, maybe for those people who haven't heard anything about it before, who haven't had the chance to read your book or sort of maybe be at one of your talks before. Why did you land on this idea of loving pedagogy as something that was important to you?
So my interest in love kind of came from two different areas, and it was, interestingly, around the time I became a parent for the first time as well. So I was introduced to Dr. Jules Page's work around professional love, and she had a particular article at the time which was entitled something like, "Do mothers want professional educators to love their children?" And I had become a mother, but was also a professional educator. So at the time I'd chosen to childmind. So I'd left teaching and I'd left consultancy, which I'd been doing previously. And I decided to stay at home with my own children and childmind, which meant putting my money where my mouth was again, which was brilliant, actually. So I really enjoyed doing that, but I was reflecting upon it from those two roles, being an educator and a parent. And then at the same time, I went to a talk about love languages. So some people have come across this idea before, but it's the idea that there are different ways that we might feel loved. So we might be loved, but we don't always feel loved. So like obviously Valentine's Day, that sort of time of year, February, somebody might feel very loved by giving a massive bouquet of flowers. If my husband bought me a really, really expensive bouquet of flowers, I would probably be really cross with him and say, we could have gone out for dinner and had the evening together. Whereas my friend, who absolutely adores lavish gestures, shall we say, would be a real token of love for her. So everyone's different. It doesn't mean you're loved any less, it just means the way you're feeling love. So there are, in the literature there are 5 love languages, and then you can speak. I was looking at this from the perspective of children, and it was introduced to me in terms again of parents and children and speaking your child's love language, so helping them to feel loved, because they are loved, but you want them to actually feel it. And so I decided, because my youngest child at the time was about she was 3. She'd gone into nursery and she was going to be going into school full time the following year. So I decided to go back and study. So I actually went back to university and did a master's degree with the sole purpose of studying love, which is what I did. So I wrote my dissertation. It was entitled "Is There a Place for Love in an Early Childhood Setting?" And really enjoyed it. And then my book Developing Loving Pedagogy came out of that, and then obviously made friends with wonderful Aaron Bradbury, and then we ended up writing the love and nurture work and creating a love and nurture rating scale. And I've built on it again and written another book called Loving Pedagogy Explained. So lots of work kind of around this area. I'm really lucky because I've been talking to lots of practitioners, and I think it's resonated with quite a lot of people. Obviously it's building on the greats of people like Dr. Jules Page and their work, but it's, I think, taking it in a slightly different direction and looking at it very much in terms of practice and what we do on a daily basis with the children.
That's wonderful. It's so, do you know what, it's so funny because I can really resonate with that idea. Me and my partner definitely have very different love languages, and I think what we've learned over the years is that it's also so natural to express love in your love language, but the other person, I think probably many couples can resonate, is you do what you want to receive and everyone ends up miserable. But I think that what's really interesting is I've never thought about that with young children and with children in general, that also the way you choose to express love might not resonate with the way they want to receive love. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how your work around love languages has kind of integrated with what children expect and how they maybe feel love differently?
So the idea is there are 5 love languages. I mean, your listeners and might think there are more, because obviously this is just a concept that some people, the people that I've read are called Chapman and Campbell, but there is lots and lots of work out there, particularly from Campbell, I think it is, around love languages in the US. And so Chapman and Campbell write in terms of parents and children and their love languages. So the 5 are, and you're going to test me now.
Yeah.
Words,
On the spot.
yeah, on the spot. Words of affirmation, so using words to demonstrate your love. Spending time together, so quality time. Giving and receiving gifts, and acts of service, and then physical touch, so positive touch.
Well done. Very well done. You remember them all. Very good.
So in terms of words, this is, you'll recognize it in a child, because you'll have a child that comes and says something like, so this actually, Julia, I'm going to pick on you. I think words is one of your love languages. I don't know if I'm right.
Ooh.
But I'll tell you why I think that, because one of the first things you said to me today was, oh, have you done something with your hair? Which was really lovely, really building me up by your words. Does that make sense?
I meant to. It does look lovely.
But she didn't go and clean your room, I noticed. That would have been an act of service.
I wasn't just buttering you up, I promise.
And to be fair, I'd have rather you had come and cleaned.
Sorry.
But and that would be an act of service, yeah. So for the children, you might hear a child they might say I love you, but they might equally say, your dress is pretty, or they might use their words to compliment you. And so we can just reciprocate, really, and use words back with that child. And really, I mean, labelled praise, I think, going back to behaviour, is one of my top tools in my toolbox anyway, because when you're using formative praise, so the child knows what they're doing that's good when you're praising them, you don't just say good girl, good boy, you kind of say, wow, I love the way you're, and tell them what they're doing that's good. But that actually is a great way of speaking their love language as well, if that's their love language. But then quality time, obviously that speaks for itself in a way, because it's spending time with the children. But with our young children, we'll notice if they speak that love language, because they'll be our shadow. I don't know if you've ever worked with a child who's your shadow and they won't leave your side. Or, you're perhaps in a primary school doing playground duty and a little hand slips into yours. And before you even look, you know who it is, and because they want to be with you. Yeah. So can you spend time with them? Can you be the one that sits next to them at lunchtime? Finding one-to-one time when you've got a class of 30 or a group of 24 children is really, really difficult. But can you make sure you greet them by name, get down to their level, when you can, go and sit next to that child, say, I've saved you a seat, because little touches like that are going to make a big difference.
Wonderful.
What else was it? It was gifts. So giving and receiving gifts. So have you ever been in an outside area and a child give you a pebble or a stone or a feather? It's a love token, isn't it? And that's a gift, and we can reciprocate there. We can find the biggest conker we can and present it to the child as a love token. So what else did we have? Acts of service, we've kind of said a little bit, but for the children, sometimes they ask us to help them even when we know they can do it. So that the child who says, can you help me? And you say, oh no, you can do it, you try. Sometimes we might need to think, how full is their emotional cup right now? Does it need a top up? If it does, do you know what? I know you can do it, but I'm going to help you anyway. So, sometimes sort of do those little helping. When you need a special helper, choosing that child will mean more to them than, having a list and working through it. And the last one was touch, wasn't it? So we all know how important touch is, and you get that dopamine, you get oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. When you're touched, you get that all of those lovely loving chemicals in your brain. So lots of our children are very kind of touchy in that sense. They'll greet you with a massive hug in the morning, and so can we reciprocate there as well, and make sure it's something in the setting that you've talked about, and you've talked about, well, what does appropriate touch look like in our setting, and think about it in detail, because I think it's easy for people to say, oh yes, we let children sit on our laps. Well, how do you let them sit on your laps? Can they do a full frontal straddle of you, or are they sitting on one knee, or with their back to you, or their front to you? Let's think in detail. What about kissing? Lots of settings would say, oh no, it's a definite no for kissing. Well, when I was a childminder, I would have kissed the children on their heads or kissed their hurts better. The parents knew that I was that sort of childminder. I made sure they knew before the children even started at the setting. If they didn't want that for their children, I was the wrong childminder for them.
I think that's an excellent
I think
tip
setting
as well.
expectations is so key to it, because that was kind of going to be my next question I wanted to ask, which was, I think it's really interesting how something that should, in many ways, be so obvious and simple, which is young children love and so on, it has this sense of friction to it somehow when it's a professional rather than a parent.
Yeah.
I think we have this expectation that, yes, parents should love their children and show that in lots of ways. But I think there can be this distance sometimes, and I wonder how you in your work have encountered and unearthed some of those frictions when you maybe say something and you feel the room go, ooh. What is it that is challenging about this topic for early years practitioners and professionals?
Well, I think we are talking about it more. When I started talking about this, I would have called love a taboo subject. I don't think it is now, which is great.
Well done. Another round of applause. We're going to give you some credit for
I'm
that.
not saying that's because of me.
Well, I think we are saying it's partly because of you, Tamsin. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. But I just think people are becoming more open about talking about these things, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I do think that touch is always going to be the topic that gets a lot of people talking about, well, what do we do? How do we do it? I think lots of people want to be told what to do. I would not like, for example, if the UK government came out with a policy on touch for us all to follow, that would not work, because children are unique, settings are unique, families are all different. I just think we need to own this ourselves as a sector and choose for ourselves what's right for us, and what's right for one practitioner might not be right for someone else. So although I will stand and say, this is my view, this is what I've done, and if I were still working with the children, I would do things perhaps this way. I don't think I should ever say, but this is what you should do, because I think people really need to reflect upon their own practice. And if they work as part of a team, it's got to be a joint team effort as well.
I think it's a really wonderful idea. Like, maybe that's already a great piece of homework for those listeners who are interested in this. Like, go and have, if you're a leader, or even if you're a practitioner and want to talk more about this, set up a staff meeting about what is our policy on touch. What because I think you're right about making it explicit.
And consent, clearly, that's really important to think about the whole elements of consent as well. And as a parent, I have one particular child who does not particularly like touch at all. So I had to learn as a parent that my first response would have been to scoop them up and cuddle them, or to want to give them a hug goodbye or hello or something like that. And that's leave me alone, they'll freeze. So I had to learn very quickly, this isn't how to work with my particular child, this isn't how to love them. So and grandparents had to learn that, and that was a difficult conversation to have. We go, rather than me as a parent saying, go and give granddad a hug before he goes home, actually, my child, it might be, they're going to wave to you from the window, granddad, so go outside and wave to them from the window. And that's okay.
I love that idea. Like, every staff member is unique, every setting is unique, and every parent is unique. And
They are.
it's up to leaders to navigate those conversations, probably, where, as you say, a parent comes in and says, this is my child, we know them really well, we know this is challenging for them. That's a conversation you need to listen to. Maybe if you have a parent who comes in and says, oh, it's okay for the older women to give them a kiss, but the men, maybe, those kind of conversations, that's maybe a moment to challenge and think about having that conversation with the parents. Because I think that is probably another quite key piece of this, is also how people feel about the relationship between different people and different kinds of people who are allowed to love in that way.
That's where it's actually been really lovely taking on a little bit of this work with Dr. Aaron Bradbury, because obviously as a man, he could really look at it from a slightly different perspective to me, because you're absolutely right. There are still people out there that would say, oh, well, it's okay for you, Tamsin, because you're a woman of a certain age, and actually, what about the man in the setting, and there are still horror stories you hear of people, who are told that the parents wouldn't let them change the nappy because they're male and things like that. And you just think, what? It's part of your job description. This is crazy. So I think there's still some work to be done around this, but I think some of it's actually around, educating society.
Big job to be done.
I'm also curious about it in terms of I know certainly when I entered the sector, I had massive misconceptions about how much sort of physical touch especially was permitted. I was very much of the impression that somehow I'd sort of picked up that, you're not allowed to cuddle children anymore and you can't pick them up and you can't do all of it. Very sort of, restrictive kind of opinion about it. And then obviously my first time in a setting, I was like, well, hang on a minute, this child's being carried about, this one's getting a cuddle, this one's so I think there's also work there about some misconceptions we have. It isn't this sort of sterile, weird environment where we're like, run along, Tim. It is a loving environment and it should be.
But we're not just talking about sort of, hugs and that whole kind of affectionate, loving touch either. We use touch to guide children. We use touch to, just literally when we're walking past a child, we might ruffle their hair or squeeze their shoulder or something. We might use touch to, hold a child's hand to keep them safe by the side of the road. Clearly, no one would ever doubt that that wasn't a sensible thing to do. So touch is actually being used in so many different ways. I think it's just the problem that we have, of course, is the sexual connotations that there is around touch. And, if things go wrong, it's very, very serious. So I think we have to safeguard ourselves. We have to safeguard the children, obviously, as the first, place to start. Once we've done that, I think we then need to have that conversation about, well, what does it look like for us here with our children, with our families, and our staff.
The element of gauging how parents feel about it right at the top, and that might be through having a very kind of explicit policy around, like as you were saying, this is how I was as a childminder, this is how we are as a setting, and this is what we believe is right. So right from the kind of get-go, parents can say, right, is that something for us or not? Because there is so much sort of uncertainty for parents. And I remember specifically reading an article where a woman was saying, well, at my child's setting, they expect that all of the educators are called auntie this or uncle that, and I don't like it because they're not the auntie and uncle of my child. So that even that level of intimacy was too much for that parent. That didn't feel right. That she wanted a professional relationship, whereas I love it when my children's, the people who look after them love on them, and I can see that they appreciate spending time with my child too. So that, having parents on board, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. I think in general, setting expectations is something that is, and I love the way even you're comfortable talking about this, Tamsin, I think is a sign of how many conversations you've had like that. And because I think that there is some level of taboo around it, and that's probably why sometimes it's like, let's have the conversation. Let's, as a staff team, have the conversation. Where are the things we feel a bit unsure about and unclear? And that's maybe the starting point. How do you recommend, in general, staffing teams out there who think, oh, actually, this is something we could be better at? Like, how do you think of that first conversation that should happen internally at a setting around the conversation of a loving pedagogy and touch in particular, given we've touched on that so much?
Yeah.
I think the first place to start is literally thinking, well, what do we want for our children, really? And starting with the children. So I think it comes back to your aims and values as a setting, and or as an individual. If you were a childminder or a nanny or somebody, it's what sits comfortably for you and what do you want for children. And I think everything else should hang off that, whether that's your policy on touch or your behaviour policy. I think it really starts with that real reflective practice and thinking, what is it? And that can also become your unique selling point, can't it? Because if you work out what it is about you and your setting that's special for you, then I think everything else can stem from that. I know that sounds really twee, doesn't it? I'm listening to myself back.
No, it doesn't. It's funny enough, it comes on to a great question that Julia prepped that I loved and wanted to get to, which was this idea that I think we've become very used to settings having their USPs as, we're a Montessori setting, we're a forest school setting, we're a Froebelian, Piaget-inspired, there's kind of a lot more comfortable around that kind of language. But I wonder what you see a setting that has truly embedded a loving pedagogy as part of their, what does that look like? When do you go into a setting that's really the best in the best of this? What does it look like in your experience?
So I think it just looks really natural, really child-centered, really family-like, and where it looks like a great setting, an effective setting where all the children are known as the unique individuals that they are, and they are all loved. I mean, you can feel love. Just like when you walk into a room, you can feel if someone's had an argument, even if you weren't there and they had the argument, you can feel love. It's very difficult to measure, of course. Will there one day be, an accreditation about, I'm a loving pedagogy setting? I think that might devalue it a little bit, if I'm honest with you.
It's more fundamental than that.
Yeah.
It's not really, I'd love people to really start from their own practice with their own children and just sort of embed it, well, sort of from the bottom up, but make sure that it's also, that their policies and procedures and everything are all aligned. But yeah.
I mean, I want to jump on that a little bit because Matt mentioned in the intro that you and I chatted at Nursery World many a year ago now.
Many moons ago
it was. We spoke about, or rather you spoke about, having loving pedagogy really embedded in your ethos. And so that got me thinking, can we use loving pedagogy in our leadership style amongst our team? Can we embody a loving pedagogy with the parents and families in our settings? Like, how might we kind of build it out?
Absolutely. And I think we can, because it's a way of being, isn't it? It's an approach. So, and it is a pedagogy, but you can also look at it in a bit like the way I might use emotion coaching at home with my teenagers or even my husband. Just because they're not early years children doesn't mean I can't have the same approach. So I think it becomes part of who you are. And my very good friend and colleague Marliese Jurging-Coles, actually, she often defines her setting in the sense of it being a loving pedagogy setting, but she talks about love languages of her staff. And, as a leader and manager, she very much leads with love. And I just think that's, she, in fact, going back to who inspires you, did you say who inspires you? What was it you said earlier?
Yeah, sure. Who or something that inspires you.
Yeah, who or what that is inspiring.
Yeah, so I should probably have said her.
Well, possible future podcast guest.
Yes, there you go. Because of the way that she leads her start, she practices what she preaches. That's what I'm trying to say.
I love that.
That is, and it's so, and I think ultimately maybe that, when you were talking, I was thinking, I was imagining this setting that you were talking about where it's really embedded. And I think it's maybe is that sense of a leader who brings confidence to her staff, and then they're confident that they know how to approach these things in the right way. I think it's a lot about confidence of the staff members. And I think what I was reflecting on is maybe when staff have a bit of timidity about how to approach either touch or in general, like those conversations of love, that maybe speaks to a setting that has some work still to do around how to help those staff feel more confident in those interactions.
I love the integrity of it. Having been an educator, there's nothing worse than, leadership saying, well, we're like this and this is what we believe, this is our ethos. And you get into the staff room and it's not really like that. But yeah, being able to say that is a person who really does practice what they preach, I think is an excellent sign that, maybe they really are living the loving pedagogy.
Yeah.
I love that. This is sort of very much from personal experience, but I would love to know, where does loving pedagogy kind of end? Because when I was working in settings, you do love the children, you care very deeply about them and their families, and then they go off to school, and sometimes, if you're very fortunate, you might stay in touch with the family, or you might be able to see what happens next for them, but very often you don't. And how do we sort of look after ourselves as educators? Because there's a grief to that. The end of that relationship.
There is, and love doesn't come without its loss. It does, but that's the joy of loving, isn't it? And so we need to see it as part of the process. Our children are with us for a set period of time, and we know that, and we still love them anyway, even though we know they're going to leave. And I just think, love is weird, isn't it? Because, you know, I love my family, I love my dog. He's actually sleeping at my feet, being a very good boy. You know, I love my husband, my children, chocolate, love them all differently.
Yeah. The lip balm.
Love a bit of lip balm.
I mean, I'm fortunate that when I was a childminder, you know, I am still in touch with a couple of those families. And, you know, one of the children has actually just turned 18 that I looked after. And it's incredible because I get to see her growing up. But the children, when I was a teacher, I'm not really in touch with any of those. Although, interestingly, I was doing an interview for a university recently, well, a couple of years ago, and one of the children that was in my reception class turned up to be interviewed to become a teacher. And it was like, oh, wow, I can't believe I knew the name. And I thought, I know this name. And as soon as I saw her, I said, do you remember me? So it was like, I was your reception teacher. So anyway, you don't forget, you know, you might forget the names, you might forget, you know, but you don't, if you see what I mean, because they are, leave a little part. But the wonderful thing about love is that it grows. You know, we jokingly said to our children literally this week, you know, when you get another child, you know, Matt, you know, can share. You don't, it's not like you think, right, my love has now got to half. My love for my first child has got to half because I now have a second child. You just get more love. And I think that's what happens. It just, you know, you just embrace more and more, don't you? And I do think it's the more you give, the more you get. Very much so.
Wonderful.
But it does come with loss. So you do have to safeguard yourself in that sense. You've got to, you know, Dr. Jules Page talks about detached attachment. I actually don't really agree with that. Because I think that holds you a tiny bit apart from the children, and I would rather dive in head first and be fully attached, but then maybe get a little bit hurt, because that's who I am. But we're all different, so like I said before, you've got to do what you feel is right for you. So you know, lots of people would rather do that kind of detached attachment thing because they want to look after themselves. That's brilliant if it works for them. I just know it wouldn't work for me.
I think it's a slightly strange comparison to make, but I have a few friends who are doctors or surgeons, and I think one of the things you really interestingly learn is that some people, they burn out after a year and they're gone from being a doctor because they can't handle that detachment. And I think there is a necessary detachment because of the nature of the job. And I think it's just a good example of where maybe practitioners, as you say, they need to find the capacity that they have. Do they need to hold themselves a little bit back because they know it's too challenging every 3 or 4 years to let go of those children? Or are they able to dive in and over time develop those relationships? And it all starts with self-reflection, doesn't it, Julia?
I think it's not talked about enough, you know. I think, you know, there's so much to say about, you know, the role of an educator and the challenges. But I think, there's not much said about there is an element of grief that comes of, you know, you're delighted to see the children move on to school and you think, oh, I've done my absolute best working with them. Brilliant. They're going off and they're going to have a great time and they're going to smash it. But there is an element of grief of like, I'm not going to see that little one every day anymore, you know. So I think, I think we should recognise that.
Very much so. To finish off then, Tamsin, if people have got, you know, enjoyed the podcast with you, they've enjoyed what they've wanted to say and they've wanted, I want more Tamsin. What can they do? How can they work with you? Where can they go and find your stuff? This is your chance to plug away.
Excellent. So it'd be super if people can look me up on my website, which is actually my name. So you can find it, just literally Google Tamsin Grimmer. You'll find my website very easily.
Lovely.
And get in touch with me because I love hearing stories, you know, whether it's about love or behaviour or anything we've talked about today. It's really nice to make connections with people. I now work with adults rather than children, so it's even more important, I think, for me to have these conversations with practitioners so that I can make sure that I'm still representing, you know, what people feel and think in the sector.
Love that.
Absolutely lovely. Tamsin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, we forgot about the tiny chair.
The chair!
We were finding a moment the whole time to get it through. Tamsin has brought for the video listeners.
No, wait. The audio listeners.
Well, she hasn't bought it for the audio listeners.
That's true.
I have brought a little tiny chair because I thought I should sit on my own tiny chair, but don't worry, I'm not going to sit on this one. It's too tiny. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring out my tiny chair and say thank you both very much.
Thank you. That is a very tiny chair. I'm impressed.
Yeah, tinier than our chair, to be
Yeah,
fair.
we'll add it to the tiny chair rankings.
Yeah, it's definitely in the top 2. Tamsin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that was good.
My goodness, it was good.
I've been working on my noises for the end of the podcast.
It was a good noise and it was a good episode.
Such a good episode. I honestly, and I said this to Tamsin after we finished recording, it's like, it feels like such an honour at the point I'm at in my life with a 2-month-old to just get to sort of have architected my career in such a way that I get to speak to world leading experts on early years, because I learned so much from that episode, and I think she was brilliant.
I love that. You can't be letting people behind the curtain like that, though.
No, that's true. This
is a seamless process.
Sorry, everyone. Yeah, the minute we say goodbye, she goes. That's how it works. What did you take away from the episode, Julia?
Oh, do you know what? I loved the bit about behaviour, and I think it is so interesting that we are moving in the right direction, I think, in the early years in terms of recognising the significance of behaviour. But I also thought it was really interesting that she was like, behaviour can be challenging. Like, we do sometimes look after children who really do, challenge us with their needs and recognising that it's not just like, oh, loving, everything's great, stand up and we're fine and we're cool and we're all happy, because that isn't the reality. So I like that.
Very nice. And we don't have any cheers for the early years this week. So come on, send them in. tinychairpod@family.co.uk. Send us in your cheers for the early years. We want to be celebrating you guys. So I guess today we just celebrate all of you, but maybe next week, someone specific.
Send us a cheers to the early years.
And if you do have an extra 2 minutes in your day, we would absolutely love it for you to just send this podcast on to someone who you think would like it. We would just love it. Say, hey, I'm going to go and send that to my friend because I think that'll mean something to them. That's the best way you can help us grow the podcast if you have got this far and you've loved what we've done.
Lovely.
Great. That's it. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.